At my son's insistence, I was finally ready to sell my old sewing studio. Then, a crying young woman burst in, pleading with me to repair an antique wedding dress by morning. Out of sheer pity, I agreed. The next day, my son rushed over, yelling, "Did you see the paper?" I opened the front page, and the floor dropped out from under me. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoy stories of resilience and justice, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to know what country you're listening from. Drop a comment below. Enjoy the listen. The steady hum of my old Singer featherweight sewing machine had been the soundtrack of my life. It had been with me longer than my husband, longer than my son's childhood, longer than the hope that my own life would turn out differently. Here, in my small workshop, tucked away in a quiet corner of downtown Charleston, time flowed at its own pace. Dust motes danced in the slanted rays of the evening sun, settling on bolts of fabric that no one would ever buy now. The air was thick with the faintly bitter smell of machine oil, dry wood from old spools, and the subtle fragrance of decades past. It had been years since I'd taken on a serious commission. Just small jobs for the neighbors, hemming a pair of slacks, replacing a zipper, patching a kid's jacket. The work didn't pay much, but it gave structure to my days, saving me from the silence of my empty condo. Each stitch was a small anchor, keeping me tethered to the present. I sat hunched over the machine, and the straight line running from beneath the needle seemed like the only ordered thing left in my world. The small bell above the door jingled sharply, a jarring sound that shattered the sleepy quiet. I looked up. Malachi and Zola, my son and his wife, they never just dropped by. "Mama, we can only stay a minute." Malachi tried to smile, but it looked strained. He surveyed the studio with the look one gives a hopelessly sick relative. Zola, his wife, didn't bother to hide her opinion. Her sharp gaze swept over the mannequins frozen in 70s poses and my sketches pinned to the corkboard and long since yellowed. "Theodora, how long can you sit in this glorified dust collector? This isn't living, it's just surviving." Her voice, always perfectly modulated, was especially cutting today. "Malachi and I worry about you." I stopped the machine silently. The humming died, and the ensuing silence was deafening. "It's not a dust collector, Zola. It's my studio," I said quietly, not to argue, but simply to state a fact. "Mama, listen," Malachi interjected, stepping closer. He placed a glossy folder of documents on my cutting table. "The buyer is offering a great price. You can finally rest, maybe take a trip down to Miami. It's been 100 years since you saw the ocean. We want you to live for yourself, not for this junk." Junk. The word hung in the air, soaking into the old fabric, the wood, into my very soul. My entire life, all the sleepless nights, all the dresses sewn for other people's celebrations, all my own failed dreams sketched in these albums, was, to them, just junk. I looked at my son. Once I'd seen admiration in his eyes for my work. Now there was only pity and a shameful impatience. He wanted this place gone quickly, this reminder of a past that didn't fit into his new, successful life of expensive restaurants and shiny luxury cars. "This studio is the only thing your father left me." My voice was level, without reproach. "He believed I had talent." "Dad died 30 years ago," Malachi exclaimed, irritation breaking through his voice. "And talent won't pay your electric bill. Mama, this is just business. An unprofitable asset. You have to understand." Zola stepped forward and opened the folder. The contract was neatly typed, a law firm's seal. She pointed to a figure at the bottom of the page. "Think about it, Theodora. You can live comfortably off this for the rest of your days, instead of breathing in mothballs here and waiting for a random client with ripped pants." She was right, of course. From the perspective of logic and common sense, her argument was flawless. I was tired. So tired of fighting. Not against them, but against life itself, which, with every passing year, left less room for what I loved. Maybe they truly did wish me well. It's just that their idea of well was different. It was measured in square footage and bank accounts, not in yards of rare silk or the perfect line of a dart. I ran my fingertips over the cool surface of the cutting table. How much fabric had it seen? How many tears of joy and disappointment? It was my silent witness, my only partner. Selling it would be like cutting off a part of myself, but I had no strength left to argue. I looked up at them, and they must have seen what they'd been waiting for. Capitulation. Fine, I sighed. I'll look over your contract. Malachi beamed. He hugged me quickly, almost formally. That's my smart mama. I knew you'd make the right decision. Zola smiled reservedly, closing the folder. Victory. She always got her way. They left, and the roar of their expensive car lingered in my ears. I was alone in the deepening twilight. The studio suddenly seemed foreign and cold. Their words had done their damage. I saw it through their eyes. An old, neglected space, full of useless things. A financial burden, a grave for failed ambition. I slowly stood, feeling the ache in my back. It was time to close up. I reached for the light switch when the bell above the door jangled again, this time frantically, as if struck. Standing on the threshold was a young woman, barely out of her teens, with disheveled hair and eyes red from crying. In her hands, she clutched a bundle of white fabric. "Excuse me, are you closed? Please, I beg you, help me." Her voice was ragged. She stepped inside, and the dim light fell upon what she held. It was a gown, a wedding gown of heavy, pearlescent silk that seemed to glow from within, and it was ruined. A huge, ugly hole yawned on the side of the skirt. The fabric wasn't just torn, it looked savagely ripped, leaving ragged, fraying edges. "What happened?" I asked, moving closer. I don't know. I snagged it on something," the girl sobbed. "I need it fixed by morning. Please, I'm begging you. This is life or death." I looked at the dress. It was incredible. Complex tailoring, exquisite draping, pure lines. They didn't make things like this anymore. It was a master's work, and the wound on it was sacrilege. "By morning, dear. That's impossible. This isn't just a seam coming undone. This requires intricate restoration, grafting the fabric." "I'll pay. Tell me how much." She looked at me with such hope, such desperation, that my heart clenched. "It's for a university exhibition, an HBCU design showcase. If I don't show it tomorrow, it's all over, my entire year's work." Her passion, her panic, something stirred within me. It was like an echo from the distant past. An echo of those times when I, too, would stay up all night for the sake of a perfect stitch, when a project felt more important than food or sleep, when I still believed I was creating beauty, not junk. I looked into her tear-filled eyes and saw reflected there a version of myself I had almost forgotten. Pity. Yes, it was pity. But not only for her. It was pity for this magnificent dress, wounded and violated, and maybe a little for myself. I sighed, feeling the exhaustion that had weighed on me since Malachi left slowly recede, replaced by something else, long forgotten. "All right," I said, "leave it with me." The girl, whose name I learned was Amara Johnson, nearly burst into tears again, but this time from relief. She hastily recited her phone number, left some cash I didn't even bother to count, and showering me with thanks, ran out the door. I locked up after her, turning the old key twice. Silence returned, but it was different now, not empty and oppressive, but filled with anticipation. I approached the large cutting table and carefully laid out the wounded treasure. I turned on the bright work lamp. Its light snatched the pearlescent sheen of the silk, the complex interplay of folds, from the gloom. I bent over the tear, and the world narrowed down to this patch of mutilated fabric. A subtle, barely perceptible scent hit my nose. Not perfume, but the essence of the material itself, expensive, old, with a history. And in that moment, looking at this work of art, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just interest, not professional excitement. It was a spark, a spark of pure, unadulterated purpose. It was as if someone had walked into the dark, abandoned room of my soul and flipped a switch. I realized that tonight, I wouldn't just be fixing an old thing, I would be fighting for something important. I retrieved my old working case from the small supply room, not the one with spools for everyday needs, but another, lined with worn velvet, where I kept the tools for real work, the kind I hadn't done in years. The finest needles of tempered steel, ivory thimbles, tiny scissors with surgical sharp tips. Everything lay in its niche, waiting for its hour. I touched the dress's fabric. My fingers, without asking my head, remembered the feel. It was it. That heritage silk, heavy and flowing, with that matte luster that can't be counterfeited. They stopped producing it back in the late 80s. It was alive, capricious. One wrong move and the thread would run, leaving an ugly scar. But if you knew how to approach it, it would fall into a fold with the obedience of water. My muscles, my body, remembered this better than my mind. My back straightened on its own. My breathing deepened, evening out. First, I had to reinforce the edges of the tear to stop the destruction. I took the finest silk organza, almost invisible, and began to slide it beneath the ragged edges from the underside. The work was slow, almost meditative. Stitch by stitch, millimeter by millimeter. I thought of neither my son, nor Zola, nor selling the studio. All that was gone, dissolved, irrelevant. There was only me, the lamplight, and this wounded beauty on my table. I needed a donor patch to cover the hole itself. I went to the old oak armoire, which Malachi called the casket of light. Deep inside, in a cardboard box, lay my treasures. Scraps of fabric I had collected all my life. A piece of velvet from an opera star's gown, a swatch of brocade from a theater costume, remnants I'd bought with my last few dollars, simply because I couldn't pass up such beauty. And there, at the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, it lay. A small piece of that same pearlescent heritage silk. I had kept it for 40 years. I hadn't dared to use it, even for a blouse for myself. I was waiting for a special occasion. It seemed it had arrived. I cut out the patch, perfectly matching the weave pattern. Now for the hardest part, stitching it in so it was invisible. And right then, as my needle entered the fabric, making the first tentative stitch from the underside, it struck me. It wasn't an epiphany or a guess. It was an absolute, unquestionable certainty that came through my fingertips. The stitch. The way the thread lay in the fabric, how it hid within the very structure of the silk, becoming invisible on the face side. This was a technique taught to me by only one person, a technique he invented himself and was fiercely proud of, calling it the shadow stitch, a near impossible feat requiring absolute control and understanding of the material. The name surfaced in my memory, not from the depths of my mind, but as if from the fabric itself. Langston Dubois. My mentor, a recluse, a genius, a madman. A man who saw a dress not as clothing, but as sculpture. He had disappeared from the fashion world 40 years ago, tired of the hustle and the compromises, and had rarely been heard from since. A cold silence suddenly fell in my chest. So quiet that I stopped hearing the street noise outside or the ticking of the old clock on the wall. All the fatigue that had pressed down on me for hours, days, years, evaporated. Its place was taken by an icy, crystal-clear focus. This was no student project. No student in the world could even copy this work, and they certainly wouldn't have access to this material. Before me lay a lost masterpiece, and the girl was just a pawn. To damage such a thing accidentally by snagging it on something was virtually impossible. This tear was intentional, barbaric. A single thought, sharp as a needle, pierced all the others. They think my only purpose is patching holes. They've grown used to seeing me as nothing more than an old woman mending other people's things for pennies. They forgot what I'm truly capable of, that I can not only repair, but also demand what is rightfully mine. This dress was not just an object. It was part of my history, part of the life they had so persistently urged me to abandon. The work stopped. My plan of action changed. This was no longer just restoration. It was preparation for battle. I pulled out my old smartphone from a drawer. The screen cracked last year, but the camera still worked. I turned the lamp brighter. First, a general shot, the dress in all its tragic beauty. Then, close-up, very close-up, the tear itself. Every fraying edge, every pulled thread. I took dozens of pictures from different angles documenting the scale of the disaster before my intervention. This was my first card. Then I put the phone aside and returned to work, but with a different goal. I had to find the main evidence. I knew it had to be there. Langston was not only a genius but a paranoid. He didn't trust labels that could be cut off. Into his most personal, most beloved creations, the ones he made not for commission, but for the soul, he sewed a special mark, a secret signature. I carefully folded back the lining on the bodice, where the silk was especially dense. My fingers moved slowly, millimeter by millimeter, along the inner seam. I remembered that day in his studio. I was in my early 20s. He had just finished a gown for a famous actress, and before putting it in the garment bag, he showed me his secret. "Remember, Theo," he had said in his quiet, raspy voice, "an artist always signs their painting, even if no one else knows where to look for the signature." And there it was. I felt it before I saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible thickening beneath the thin lining fabric. I took my tweezers and slightly separated the stitches. There it was, a single silver thread woven into the seam, fine as a spider web, almost invisible against the light fabric, but it was there. His mark, his signature, known only to him and me. My heart began to beat evenly and powerfully. I took the phone again, bringing the lamp as close as possible. It took a long time to focus on such a tiny detail. Finally, it worked. The shutter click sounded like a gunshot in the silent studio. I took a few more shots, making sure the silver gleam of the thread was clearly visible. Now I could finish. I worked until dawn. My body didn't feel tired. It was like returning home after a long, painful exile. Every stitch of the shadow stitch was perfect. The donor patch settled into place as if it had always belonged there. I treated the edges, restored the draping. When the final knot was tied and hidden, I leaned back in the chair. Perfection lay on the table, whole, undamaged. The wound was gone, as if it had never existed. Sunlight, breaking through the dusty window, touched the silk, and it came alive, shimmering with pearlescent iridescence. I looked at it and understood. Tonight, I hadn't just fixed a dress. I had fixed something inside myself, something broken and long abandoned. I had reclaimed something greater than just professional pride. I had reclaimed myself, and now I was ready. I carefully hung the dress on the old mannequin, zipped it into a large cotton bag so the morning sun wouldn't touch the delicate fabric. A night without sleep brought no fatigue. On the contrary, a strange, ringing energy flowed through my body, an energy I hadn't felt in years. I brewed a strong cup of black coffee in a mug my father used to use and sat at my workbench, just watching the morning street. Sanitation trucks rumbled by, the city woke up, and I sat in the epicenter of my own quiet storm, feeling completely calm for the first time in a long time. I knew what would happen next. The bell jingled precisely at 9 o'clock, as we had arranged. Amara stood at the door. Overnight she had managed to clean herself up, but her eyes were still swollen, and anxious anticipation was etched on her face. "Hello, I'm ready," she whispered, afraid to believe. I nodded silently and removed the garment bag from the mannequin. The girl gasped, softly, almost soundlessly, pressing her palm to her mouth. She slowly approached. Her gaze darted across the skirt, trying to find the spot where catastrophe had loomed just yesterday. She couldn't find it. Her fingers trembled as they reached for the silk, but she didn't dare touch it. "How?" she whispered. "But how? It can't be. It's like new, even better." "Just work," I said evenly. I didn't need her gratitude. I needed her trust. She finally looked up at me, and tears were in her eyes. But now, they were tears not of desperation, but of some religious awe. "You're a miracle worker," she whispered. Amara reached into her bag, pulled out a thick wad of cash, and held it out to me. "Here is more than we agreed on. Much more. It's everything I had. Please, take it." I pushed her hand away. "I'll take exactly what my work costs, not one dime more." I counted out a few bills from the cash she'd left yesterday and put the rest back in her palm. "And this is for good luck at your exhibition." She looked at me, completely bewildered. She was clearly used to a world where everything has a price, and the better the result, the higher the price tag. My refusal didn't fit her worldview. "Thank you," she finally said, confused. "Thank you so much. I will never forget this." I helped her repack the dress into the garment bag. Escorting her to the door, I watched her almost run across the street, clutching the precious bundle to her chest, as if afraid the miracle might dissolve. I closed the door and returned to the studio. The air still held the faint scent of expensive fabric. I slowly put my special tools back into the velvet-lined case and wiped down the table. Everything had to look as if nothing had happened, as if that night hadn't existed, as if I were still the same tired old woman ready to give up. No more than half an hour passed before the bell jingled again. This time, confidently, possessively. Malachi and Zola walked in, beaming. My son held that glossy folder. "Good morning, Mama," he chirped. "We decided to swing by early to finalize everything." "You probably didn't sleep, thinking it all over. We brought your favorite almond croissants from that bakery downtown." He placed a ribbon-tied box on the table, a gesture meant to demonstrate care, but it reeked of falsehood, like cheap cologne. "Thank you, you shouldn't have," I said, continuing to wipe the spools of thread. "Oh, it's no trouble at all, Theodora," Zola chimed in. Her quick, sharp gaze was scanning the room. She was looking for clues, evidence, remnants of silk, unusual threads, anything that broke the usual picture of dreary routine. "You've made the only correct decision for all of us. You can finally live like a proper person, not a hermit." She went to one of the mannequins and disdainfully brushed an imaginary speck of dust from its shoulder. Her maneuvers were so obvious. She was closing in on the main point. "I hope you had a quiet night," she asked, turning around. Her smile was as sweet as poison. I shrugged. "Same as usual." And that's when she delivered the blow she believed was perfectly disguised. She walked up to my workbench, picked up a random spool of gray thread, and twirled it, feigning idle curiosity. "Nothing interesting happened while we were finalizing the documents?" she asked so casually that her pretense became almost tangible. "Maybe someone came in with an unusual order? Did you run into any interesting old rags?" She emphasized the word rags subtly. She was testing me, probing. I stopped wiping the dust. I slowly put the rag on the table and raised my eyes to hers. I stared directly into her pupils, holding the gaze, letting the pause stretch just a fraction of a second longer than was polite. I saw a flicker of apprehension flash and die deep in her eyes. "No," I replied calmly, slightly tired. "Nothing like that. Just the usual routine." I paused briefly before adding the detail that should finally reassure them. "A student came by last night, asked me to fix a dress for some university showcase. A rip in the skirt. Simple work." That was it, what they wanted to hear. I saw the tension leave their bodies. Malachi's shoulders, which had been tight, sagged. Zola exhaled almost silently. Her sickeningly sweet smile briefly became genuine. The smile of a predator convinced its prey suspects nothing. They exchanged a fleeting glance, the look of triumphant winners. They were sure the old woman had swallowed the bait, fixed a priceless item for pennies, mistaking it for a student fake. And now she could be permanently written off. Their arrogance was my greatest ally. They couldn't even entertain the thought that I was capable of understanding or deciding anything. In their world, I was just a bothersome relic of the past, to be neatly disposed of. Well, thank goodness for that. Malachi smiled again, his wide, boyish smile that no longer moved me. "Less trouble. Here, Mama, let's sign the papers and get this over with." He placed the folder in front of me, opened it to the last page where the place for my signature was marked with a check mark. He held out an expensive gold-nibbed pen. I looked at the pen, at the contract, then at their beaming, expectant faces. I didn't take the pen. I simply closed the folder and slid it next to the box of croissants. "I'll read it later," I said softly. "Not right now. I need to finish tidying up." A moment of bewilderment crossed their faces, but only for a second. They naturally attributed it to my old-age slowness, my reluctance to part with habit. They didn't see a decision in my words. They only saw a postponement of their inevitable victory. "Of course, Mama. Whatever you say." Malachi quickly agreed, so as not to spook their luck. "You rest up. We'll call you this evening." They left, leaving behind the smell of expensive perfume and a sense of total victory. I heard their laughter fade at the end of the street. I was left alone. The folder with the contract lay on the table like a tombstone. I looked at it, then shifted my gaze to my old, faithful thimble lying nearby. They had underestimated not just me. They had underestimated the power that lies dormant in the silence of an old studio and in the memory of a person who dedicated their life to a craft. And for that mistake, they would have to pay. I looked at the contract folder they left on the table next to the untouched croissants. Two foreign objects in my world. One, a promise of comfortable emptiness. The other, a pathetic attempt to sweeten betrayal. I picked up both and, without opening them, tossed them into the trash bin under the table. I wasn't angry. I felt a strange, cold relief, as if I had shed a long-standing illness. The day continued, but everything was different. The air in the studio seemed cleaner, the light brighter. I didn't sit down at the machine. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I pulled out my old albums from a far drawer, thick cardboard-bound books. Inside, on pages yellowed with time, lived my sketches. Not the working drafts pinned to the wall, but the real, labored designs. Evening gowns, structured coats, flowing skirts. My ill-fated 1978 collection, the year Malachi was born and I died as an artist. I turned the pages, and the past ceased to be just a memory. It was here, in these lines, in these pencil marks. I recognized myself in them, bold, full of hope, confident in my talent. The woman who believed Langston when he said I had a unique voice. Where had it all gone? Dissolved in endless diapers, pots of soup, mending my son's school pants, in the exhaustion of a single mother who had to be both strong and weak at the same time. I looked at those sketches, and there was no bitterness in me. There was only a quiet acceptance of the fact. This was also a part of me, the part I allowed to be taken. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't immediately recognize the sound that tore me from the past. The bell above the door didn't jingle. It hammered in a frenzy, as if someone were pounding it with a fist. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. Malachi stood at the threshold. He wasn't just agitated. He was in a panic. His face was white as a hospital gown. His eyes darted everywhere. His expensive cashmere jacket was crooked. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled newspaper. "Mama, did you see this?" His voice broke into a yell, shattering the sacred silence of my studio. I slowly closed the album and stood up, everything inside me stilled, waiting. I knew this was the climax, the moment everything had been leading to. I silently held out my hand. He stepped toward me and practically threw the newspaper onto the table. I picked it up. It wasn't the main city paper, but a glossy supplement dedicated to the social scene, the Atlanta Socialite, Events and Faces. And I saw it. On the front page, spread across the fold, was a photograph. A woman, a local actress or TV host, I didn't keep up with them, stood against a backdrop of columns in a luxurious ballroom. She was smiling at the camera, and the spotlight played off the fabric of her dress. The dress, that very dress, It fit her perfectly. Every seam, every fold was in place. It was alive, breathing. It was the main star of that celebration of vanity. My night's work shone under the camera flashes. I looked up at the headline, printed in huge letters. Winter Bride, Langston, Dubois's lost masterpiece, unearthed by philanthropist Zola Dubois for charity auction. Zola Dubois, my daughter-in-law. The floor didn't drop out from under me. No, it just disappeared, and I hung suspended in a cold, airless void. All sounds ceased. I could only hear the pounding of blood in my ears. I lowered my gaze and skimmed the first lines of the article. The words, set in fine print, stabbed into my brain like hot needles. A true sensation in the city's cultural life, a priceless find. Zola Dubois, known for her charitable endeavors, has made a discovery that will go down in fashion history. And then, the paragraph that was meant for me personally, a blow aimed straight at the heart. As Ms. Dubois herself described it, the unique gown was discovered quite by chance in a dusty old shop on the outskirts of town, where it had been stored for decades, unrecognized and unappreciated. It felt like a miracle, Zola shares. I immediately knew I had something special. Experts have already confirmed the authenticity of the work by the great couturier Langston Dubois. Preliminary forecasts suggest the lot could fetch several $1 million at the upcoming charity auction. A dusty old shop. So that was it. The entire picture. The mosaic pieces, which had been scattered haphazardly, clicked together into a single, ugly canvas. The pressure to sell the studio, their feigned concern, the sudden appearance of the frightened student with a masterpiece in her hands, their morning visit and that casual question about old rags, their huge, undisguised relief when I said it was a simple repair. Everything became sickeningly, disgustingly clear. They knew. They knew everything from the beginning. They knew the dress was here. Maybe it had been hidden somewhere in old trunks left by previous owners, or Malachi's father had bought it once and forgotten to mention it. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they found it, but it was damaged, and to turn it into a sensation and millions of dollars, they needed a restorer. Not just a good restorer, but a world-class master who could perform a miracle. And yet one who wouldn't understand a thing, wouldn't ask extra questions, and would do everything quietly, anonymously. And they had such a master right under their noses, an aging mother whose skills they despised and considered a hobby. They didn't just need the treasure, they needed my skill to clean up that treasure before displaying it. They used me, my life, my memory, my connection to Langston, my love for the craft. All of it they used as an anonymous tool for their dirty scheme. They forced me to restore my own past so they could sell it. I slowly, very slowly, folded the newspaper. My fingers did not tremble. I looked at my son. He was still standing before me, his face contorted with fear. But he wasn't afraid for me. He was afraid their plan would collapse. "Did you see it?" he repeated, quieter now, with desperation. I looked him straight in the eyes, and in that moment, he must have seen something new in me, not the familiar, quiet, compliant mother. "Yes, Malachi," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar, level and firm, as if it didn't come from my throat, but from the very ground beneath me, which had suddenly returned, becoming harder than granite. "Now I see everything." Malachi stared at me, and the panic in his eyes turned into confusion. He expected anything, tears, reproaches, shouting, but not this icy, all-knowing composure. My silence frightened him more than any scandal. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to start offering some ridiculous excuse, but I preempted him. "Go home, Malachi," I said, and my voice didn't waver. I picked up the newspaper from the table, carefully folded it into quarters, and placed it on the shelf next to old-fashioned magazines, as if it were an ordinary news item that had nothing to do with me. "Go to your wife. You two clearly have something to discuss." My action was the final straw. He understood the conversation was over. that the wall that grew between us in that second was higher and stronger than the wall of this old studio. He turned and, without saying a word, practically ran out the door, leaving it ajar. I heard his steps fade in the street. I walked over and closed the door, turning the key in the lock. Then one more turn. I was alone. The pain came later, when the adrenaline subsided. It wasn't sharp, but a dull, aching throb, like an old wound opening up in bad weather. This wasn't just betrayal, it was something far worse. They didn't just want to take my studio, that island of my past. They wanted to rip out the most valuable fragment of that past, polish it with my own hands, and put it up for sale, claiming not only the money, but also the history that was never theirs. They didn't just devalue my labor. They tried to steal the very essence of who I was. They took my memory, my only true wealth, and turned it into a commodity. And the worst part was that their main weapon was my own son, the man for whom I had given up everything chronicled in my old albums. He looked at my legacy and saw only zeros on a bank statement. I sat down at the table. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, a cold, heavy fury mounted inside. But it wasn't the blind rage that destroys everything in its path. It was the fury of a master who sees barbarians attempting to ruin a work of art. It didn't cloud my mind. On the contrary, it made it crystal clear. I knew that my words, my memories, wouldn't be enough. My truth against their money and connections would be an empty sound. I needed proof. I needed a witness. I reached for the old notepad where I had mechanically jotted down the girl's number yesterday. Amara. My fingers trembled slightly as I pressed the buttons on my old phone. It rang for a long time. I thought she wouldn't answer, when a frightened, muffled whisper came through. Hello? Amara, it's Theodora Dupree from the studio, I said as calmly as possible. Silence hung on the other end, followed by ragged breathing. She was scared to death. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. You have the wrong number. I don't think so, Amara. My voice remained level. I'm calling about the dress, the one on the front page of today's paper. She gasped, a short, desperate sound. I don't know anything. I was asked to. I'm not involved. I know you were asked to, Amara. I even know who. Zola, isn't it? Her silence was her admission. I could hear her trying to suppress a sob. They told me it was a family heirloom. She finally burst out. That the dress was ruined at the dry cleaner and needed to be fixed anonymously to avoid a scandal. They said it was a surprise for a relative. I didn't know, I swear. I didn't know it was stolen. It's not stolen, Amara. Not yet. But it soon will be, and you will be an accomplice. No, she cried in a whisper. Please, don't drag me into this. Zola, she'll destroy me. She said if I told anyone, I have my whole life ahead of me, my education. Please, don't ruin me. She was terrified, and I understood her. Zola, with her money and influence, could easily break a young student's life. Threatening her would be useless and cruel. I had to find another way. I paused, allowing her to vent her fear. Amara, listen to me, I said quietly, but so that every word reached her. I'm not going to ruin you, and I won't threaten you. I want to ask you one question. You want to be a designer, right? She mumbled something unintelligible in response. You saw that dress. You held it in your hands. You understand that it's not just an object, it's a work of art. It was created by a genius. It has a history, a name, a soul. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Now, they are trying to gut that soul. They want to steal that history and rewrite it. The man who created it, my mentor Langston Dubois, poured his life into his work. He despised lies and vanity, and now his name, his creation, is being used in the dirtiest lie for money and fame. I heard her steady breathing. She was listening. Art has a history, Amara, and every person who touches it has a choice. To stand with those who preserve that history or those who steal it. Yesterday, you brought me a wounded thing. Today, you can help save its legacy. Who do you want to be, Amara? A designer who starts her career by being complicit in fraud, or a person who did the right thing even when it was terrifying. The silence lasted an eternity. I didn't pressure her. I gave her time to make her choice. This was her fight, her decision. What do I need to do?" she finally whispered. Her voice was trembling, but the hysteria was gone. There was only resolve. "Did Zola give you instructions by phone, or did she write messages?" "Yes," she answered. "SMS messages. I saved everything. What to bring, what to say, when to pick it up." "Forward them to me, Amara. Everything you have. That will be enough." "But she'll find out." "She will find out eventually anyway," I cut in. "The only question is, which side of the barricade will you be on when everything is exposed? With me or with her?" Another long pause, and then I heard a quiet, distinct ping. My old phone vibrated in my hand, then another, and another. "I sent them," Amara said. There was panic in her voice and some kind of bitter relief. "Everything I had." "Thank you, Amara," I said sincerely. "You made the right choice." I ended the call and opened the messages. There they were, in black and white, cold, businesslike instructions from Zola. "Tell her it's for a university showcase. Make up a story about how you ripped it. The main thing is that she doesn't suspect anything. She's just an old seamstress." Just an old seamstress. I put the phone down on the table. There was no more pain or fear inside me, only a cold, ringing emptiness, ready to be filled with action. I had everything I needed: witness testimony, photographs of the dress damaged and after restoration, and the main ace, the picture of the silver thread, the master's secret signature. The game was no longer even. Now I held all the cards and I was ready to make my move. I didn't wait for the evening. I knew they would come. Panic is a bad advisor. It always pushes people to thoughtless, hasty actions. I just sat at my workbench, sorting through old spools of thread, and waited. The studio was quiet, but the silence was electric, like the air before a storm. Every creak of the floorboards outside, every distant car horn, made me alert. They arrived an hour later. I heard their car brake sharply by the gate. Doors slammed almost simultaneously. Their footsteps across the street were fast and nervous. The bell above the door struck, as if they wanted to tear it off its hinges. They burst inside. Malachi was still pale, but now his panic was mixed with anger, the anger of a weak man backed into a corner. Zola, conversely, held her composure. Her face was like an expensive porcelain mask, but a cold fire burned in her eyes. She was the one in charge here. She hadn't come to ask. She'd come to demand. "What was that this morning?" she began without preamble. Her voice was shrill with restrained fury. "What kind of stunt was that, Theodora? Malachi says you were acting strange." I slowly raised my eyes to them. I didn't answer her question. I looked at my son, who was avoiding my gaze, studying his flawlessly clean shoes. "The auction house called," Zola continued, pacing the studio like a caged tiger. "Some idiotic journalist dug up that the dress was damaged, and now the experts are interested in who performed such a brilliant, anonymous restoration. You understand, this complicates our story, creates unnecessary questions." She stopped right in front of me, pressing her palms onto my table. She loomed over me, trying to crush me with her energy, her aggression. "So listen to me carefully. You will pick up that pen now. You will sign that damn contract that Malachi foolishly left here, and you will forget everything that happened. The student, the dress, everything. If anyone asks questions, you will say you saw nothing and know nothing. You are just an old woman who sold her unprofitable studio and left on vacation. Is that clear?" It was an order, an ultimatum. She didn't even try to hide anything. She was simply stating my role in her world, the role of a silent, obedient function that could be unplugged when no longer needed. I looked at her perfect manicure, at the cold gleam of the diamonds in her ears. I looked at her and felt nothing but a kind of detached revulsion. The woman who stood before me was not the one who had come here yesterday or this morning. Yesterday's woman was weak, tired, ready to surrender. Today's was someone else, someone they didn't know and couldn't imagine. I ignored her words in the contract folder. My gaze drifted to the shelves of fabric. I slowly stood up, approached the shelving unit, and ran my fingertips over the edge of a heavy bolt of deep green silk. The fabric was cold, smooth, alive. "Heritage silk," I said softly, almost to myself, but in the sudden silence, every word sounded deafening. "It's so rare. They don't make it anymore. They say the secret to that weave is lost." Zola froze. My behavior didn't fit her script. She expected either submission or hysterics. But I was talking about fabric. I turned back to her. "And the work on the seam, the shadow stitch, as he called it, that was Langston's secret. He never showed it to anyone but me. The thread passes inside the fibers, you see, so you can't see it from the face or the back. It creates the illusion that the fabric is whole, as if it grew back together itself." I spoke calmly, almost like a museum lecturer explaining the nuances of an ancient craft. I watched the incomprehension on Zola's face change to anxiety. Malachi finally looked up. His face showed utter panic. He was starting to understand something. I let the silence hang in the air for a few seconds, allowing it to fill with their fear. Then I returned to the table, picked up my old worn phone, and placed it on the wooden surface, screen up. With a slight movement of my finger, I opened the gallery and zoomed in on the last photo. The shot wasn't very clear, but what was needed could be plainly distinguished: the lining, the seam, and the tiny, almost unreal silver glint inside the stitches. Zola leaned down, peering at the screen. I saw her pupils widen. "Langston Dubois sewed that thread in front of my eyes. In 1978, my voice was hard as the steel of my old scissors. He said it was his way of marking what he truly loved. He didn't trust labels." I looked up at them. First at Zola, then at Malachi, my son. "You didn't discover his work. You attempted to steal my past, and you used me to do it." The words dropped into the studio's silence, like stones down a deep well. The mask on Zola's face cracked. For a moment, I saw her true face underneath, the face of a predator who realized the prey was a trap. Malachi recoiled and slumped into the chair, clutching his head. You knew everything?" he whispered, looking up at me with horror and a kind of childish confusion. "Not right away," I replied. "You planned everything too well, but you made one mistake. You decided I was just an old seamstress. You forgot who I was, who Langston made me. You counted on my weakness, but you ran into my memory. And memory, Malachi, is the one thing they can't take from me." Zola was the first to recover. Her panic was brief. It quickly transformed into a new, even more toxic form of rage. She straightened, and that porcelain mask returned to her face. Only now a snarl was visible beneath it. "Is that so?" she hissed, stepping away from the table. "You decided to play games? Too bad. You're forcing me to act tougher." She pulled out her sleek smartphone. Her fingers quickly ran across the screen. Malachi looked at her with fear. "Zola, don't," he started, but she cut him off with an icy glare. "Shut up. You've done enough," she snapped, not looking at him, and raised the phone to her ear. I watched silently. I knew what she was going to do. She would try to destroy me, frame me as crazy, tarnish my name before I could say a word. It was her style, a preemptive strike. "Dr. Vance, hello?" Her voice instantly became smooth and concerned. "It's Zola Dubois. I'm sorry to bother you at a time like this. Yes, about the Dubois dress. I have a delicate family problem." She was speaking to Dr. Elias Vance, the head of the Langston Dubois Legacy Foundation, a man who commanded absolute authority on everything concerning my mentor's work. "You see, my mother-in-law, Theodora, she's an elderly woman. Lately, she's, unfortunately, not been quite right, confuses her memories." Zola paused dramatically. She was acquainted with Langston Dubois in her distant youth. And now, with all the commotion about the dress, she started having, let's just say, fantasies. She claims it's her achievement, that she found the dress. She's even trying to claim authorship of the restoration. It's very sad. My husband and I are deeply concerned about her condition. She lied expertly, with perfect pauses, with the right touch of sorrow in her voice. She was painting a picture of a senile old woman who had fallen into dementia and was trying to steal a minute of fame from her successful daughter-in-law. It was a powerful move, a gut punch. She was making me not just a liar, but a pathetic, incompetent woman whose words couldn't be trusted. Yes, of course, she continued. I just wanted to warn you, in case she tries to contact you, so you're prepared. We're already arranging her treatment. Thank you for understanding, Dr. Vance. Goodbye. She ended the call and placed the phone on the table with a triumphant look. That's it, she said with an icy smile. Checkmate, Theodora. Any word you say now will be dismissed as the rambling of a lunatic. And now, be a good girl and sign the documents. We want to end this circus. She was talking, and I was looking at my old phone, which had been lying quietly on the table all this time. And while she was performing her act, it had vibrated silently. Once. It was a delivery notification. I didn't answer her. I just picked up my phone, found the right number in my contacts, and pressed the call button. Zola stared at me in confusion. The other end answered almost immediately. Hello? The voice was male, deep, slightly tired. Dr. Vance? I asked. Hello, my name is Theodora Dupree. Your granddaughter-in-law just called you, telling you about my fantasies. Silence hung on the line. Zola froze, her face slackening. She couldn't believe I dared to do this. Yes, Theodora, the head of the foundation finally answered. His tone was cautious, but not dismissive. I'm listening. I won't take up much of your time, I said calmly. I just want to ask you to check your email. 10 minutes ago, I sent an email to the foundation's official address. Subject, the true story of the winter bride gown. Please take a look, especially the attachment. Zola lunged for me, trying to snatch the phone. What are you doing, you old witch? But I stepped back, continuing to speak into the phone. You'll find several photographs there, Dr. Vance. Photographs of the dress with a savage rip in the skirt. They were taken the night before last in my studio. And also photos of the flawlessly restored dress taken yesterday morning, also in my studio. I heard keyboard clicks on the other end of the line. You will also find correspondence between my daughter-in-law and a girl named Amara Johnson, a Fashion Institute student. From this correspondence, it is absolutely clear that the girl was hired to play the role of a desperate student and bring the dress to me for an anonymous repair. Ms. Dubois, in her messages, refers to me simply as an old seamstress who wouldn't suspect anything. Zola's face turned ashen. She knew this was not a bluff. And finally, I continued, and my voice became firmer, the most important attachment. It's a photograph of the inner seam on the bodice of the dress. If you zoom in on the image, you will see a single silver thread. It is Langston Dubois' secret mark, his signature, which only 2 people in the world knew about, himself and I, his student. He placed it in my presence in 1978. Silence fell on the line again. But this time it wasn't the silence of polite disbelief. It was the silence of shock. The silver thread, Dr. Vance finally said, and his voice held a tremor of awe. In his late journals, there was a vague hint of a silver signature, but no one ever understood what he meant. We thought it was a metaphor. It's not a metaphor, I said. It's the truth. And now, Dr. Vance, I would like you to compare my story, backed by evidence, with the one my daughter-in-law told you, and decide which of us is having fantasies. We are immediately launching an internal investigation. His voice had turned from tired to steel. The auction will be halted until all circumstances are clarified. Thank you for calling, Theodora. We will be in touch with you very soon. I hung up. Zola stared at me with empty, disbelieving eyes. Her perfectly constructed world was crumbling before her. Her brilliant scam, her ticket to high society, had turned into a pumpkin. She made one last desperate attempt to save herself. "You'll regret this!" she shrieked. "I will destroy you! I'll prove all this is a fake!" But there was no power left in her voice, only fear. I looked at her, then at my son, who sat huddled on the chair covering his face, and for the first time in all this, I felt something akin to pity. Not for her, but for him. "Leave," I said softly. "Just leave." They left, not like victors, but like thieves caught in the act. Zola still tried to drag out the remnants of her dignity, but Malachi walked with his head down and seemed to have shrunk by half his height. When the door closed behind them, I walked to the window. I watched them cross the street, get into their expensive car, and drive off fast. The scandal broke the very next day. The newspapers that had been singing Zola Dubois's praises as a philanthropist yesterday now ran devastating headlines. The scam of the century, attempted fraud with Dubois' legacy, foundation launches investigation. Zola's name was everywhere, but now it was covered not in glory, but in shame. Her world had collapsed loudly and publicly. The silence that returned to the studio was deafening. It no longer oppressed me or brought melancholy. It was the silence of strength, the silence of a clean space, ready to be filled with something new. I didn't clear the phone from the table. I simply sat and waited. Several weeks passed. The noise around the story gradually subsided, turning from a hurricane into a distant rumble. First, there were calls, dozens of them, from yellow press journalists, whom I learned to dismiss with a cold, no comment. There were others from serious art and fashion publications. I spoke to them briefly, sticking to the facts. I didn't accuse or complain. I just talked about the dress, the shadow stitch, the silver thread, about my mentor Langston Dubois. I wasn't defending my honor. I was defending his legacy. Malachi didn't call. I knew their lives were in ruins. The Dubois Foundation had sued Zola for attempted fraud and reputational damage. Their names vanished from the social columns. I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, long-standing ache for my son, who had traded his own mother for a glittering fake and ended up with nothing. He made his choice, and I made mine. One morning, I came into the studio and realized I couldn't breathe this dust anymore. Not physical dust, but the dust of oblivion that I myself had allowed to cover everything. I threw open the windows, letting in the fresh, cool autumn air, and started a deep cleaning. It wasn't just washing floors and wiping shelves. It was a ritual. I shook out every bolt of fabric, sorted boxes of buttons, went through old patterns. I washed the windows, and the dull street outside suddenly gained color. Sunlight, which the studio hadn't seen in years, poured in, dancing on the old wooden surfaces and the metallic gleam of the scissors. Sorting through papers on the table, I stumbled upon the glossy sales contract folder, the one they had left on their last visit. I held it in my hands. It no longer seemed threatening. It was just a piece of cardboard filled with dead words. I didn't tear it up in anger. I simply walked over and quietly dropped it into the trash bin. The box of long-dried croissants went in after it. The studio was transformed. It seemed to stretch its shoulders, becoming taller, more spacious. It was mine again. Not a storage unit for the past, but a workspace. One of those days, the postman brought a heavy, flat package. It had no return address, just a logo. 2 intertwined letters, LD, the Langston Dubois Foundation. I opened it on the large cutting table. Inside, resting on a lining of deep red velvet, lay a heavy bronze plaque. It wasn't a medal or a cup. It was a simple, severe board, polished to a shine. Engraved on it were just a few words. To Theodora Dupree, for unsurpassed craftsmanship and preservation of legacy. Below was a facsimile signature, the very flourish of Dubois that I knew by heart. I ran my fingers over the cool letters. There were no tears, no wild joy. There was only a deep, quiet sense of rightness. as if the final piece had fallen into place and the picture of my life was finally complete. This wasn't a reward for a victory over someone. It was recognition of who I had always been. The winter bride gown was transferred to a museum. Its story, now authentic, was described in detail on the nearby plaque. My name was mentioned there too. Restoration performed by Theodora Dupree, student of the master. That was enough. I put the package down, and my gaze fell upon the old oak armoire where my own dreams slept in cardboard folders. I walked up to it, opened the creaking door, and took out one of the folders, the one marked 1978. I returned to the cutting table and carefully untied the ribbons. I pulled out the top sheet. It was a sketch of a dress, simple yet elegant tailoring with an asymmetrical collar and long, narrow sleeves. I remembered drawing it, late at night by the lamplight while little Malachi slept in the next room. I had been full of hope then. The sheet was old, yellowed, and the edges were trying to curl up. Before, I would have weighed it down with an old cast-iron smoothing iron, but today, my hand reached for something else. I picked up the heavy bronze plaque from the foundation and carefully placed it on the upper left corner of the sketch. The award for preserving the past became the weight that held my future in place. Then I took my working scissors from the wall, the large tailor's shears of blued steel. They lay heavy and familiar in my palm. I walked to the shelving unit where a new untouched bolt of fabric stood. Italian silk, different, modern, but no less beautiful, dense, ivory-colored, with a matte sheen. I measured the required length and spread it out on the table next to the sketch. A sunbeam fell onto the fabric, and it came alive. I raised the scissors. The world stood still. There was only this moment, me, my design, and the blank canvas waiting for its hour. I made the first cut. In the silence of the renewed studio, a distinct, crisp sound rang out, a satisfying sound, the sound of silk being sliced, the sound of a new beginning. And so, Theodora Dupree's story ended. Thank you, dear listeners, for walking this path with her. This story is not only about betrayal, but about the quiet, unyielding strength that sleeps within each of us, waiting for its hour. Theodora chose not to scream and retaliate against the malice of her closest family. She chose a different path, the path of craftsmanship, dignity, and undeniable truth. But was her choice the only right one? Was the cold composure she displayed worth the deep wound she undoubtedly carried in her heart? This story raises difficult questions for us. What drives children to such deceit against their own parents? A craving for money, a pursuit of undeserved fame, or perhaps a deep inner emptiness they tried to fill with stolen glory? And the main question that many of you may have, what would you have done in Theodora's place? Could you have just as coolly built your defense and delivered a crushing counterblow? And the hardest part, could you ever forgive your son? We'd be very interested to know your thoughts. Share your opinions in the comments below this video. Did the main character do the right thing, or should she have acted differently? Perhaps you have questions about the fate of the characters, or certain details of the story sparked your curiosity. Don't hesitate to ask. Your support is very important to us. So, if you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our new, equally captivating tales. Thank you for being with us. We value each and every one of you. We wish you all the best.